So just a quick introduction on myself. My name is Matt Moore. I am the Director for Electronic Certification in the Department of Agriculture, Water and Resources. I've been working on paperless certification for about 10 years now, and the initial focus for Australia was very much in an export space. About 70% of Australia's agricultural products are exported. And as we know, Australia is a long, long way from pretty much everywhere except for our friends in New Zealand. And we wanted to help find ways that we could provide assurities for our trading partners in a digital way. And thankfully for us, we've had some excellent partners along the way, such as the Netherlands, where Eric has been extraordinarily helpful, as well as many others around the world. But in relation to this work in particular, the paperless guidance material. So what was the aim of this? So the aim really was not to reinvent the wheel or go crazy. It was to add to what was already there in terms of existing guidance around paper certification, because that covered a lot of elements in terms of exporter, importer, the roles of competent authorities. But what we wanted to do was modernize that and show that and provide a bit of a guidance or a roadmap, as we say in Australia, a plan to how we would get to paperless and how we would accelerate the delivery of paperless, especially now in a situation where we've been dealing with a global pandemic for a number of years now, and we have seen the effect it has had on not just our people, but also our ability to transport goods and give the same assurities that we have once before. And the guidance made a really strong effort to cover the different stages that would go through. So whether you're at the very first stage of starting to invest or analyze or really explore what paperless certification is to you, whether you're partway there, whether you're sending PDFs, whether you're just playing in the XML space, or whether you are at the verge of, or you're already paperless, and how you might actually interact with countries that aren't and understand the barriers that they may have as well. Also, the ways to exchange. How do we do it? We know that there's multiple options for sending information around the world now, and we've made a very conscious effort to capture the most common ones that are used for electronic certification, but also not limit it to the point where we know technology will advance, and how this guidance material can take that into account. Considerations as well. What do you need to think of? What do your trading partners need to think of? And the generic model certificate, which I think is absolutely valuable. It's one of the highlights of the guidance document for me. It's something that I wish I had 10 years ago when I started out. And the key was that it could be used by anyone and used across organizations. It wasn't limited to agricultural trade. There was a conscious effort to align it with things like the WCO, and also keeping in mind, especially when it comes to how we exchange, things like national single windows as well. So there's some key additions that we added in there, and some of the keys being the principles around issuing paperless certification, and are there infrastructures and capabilities in place to allow you to do it, and where the ownership or the responsibility changes hands from an exporter to an importer. And from an Australian point of view, this is something that we started our journey off many years ago in the late 90s, early 2000s, and dealing with different levels of infrastructure. The internet is not as good in some places as it is in others. South Korea, who we have an exchange with, I think they've got the third fastest internet in the world, and Australia's, I think we've got we're somewhere very low, 50 or something like that. So, and also the ability to be able to invest in that infrastructure, and the notification of when I provide you a paperless certificate and your acknowledgement of that now means that the certificate lies with you. I've handed over that responsibility, and the processes around that are really key in terms of how you do your business clearance, and making sure that we don't forget other people along the way. Because as we know, the paper certificate now might satisfy more than just agricultural trade. It might be used by Ministry of Finance. It might be used for custom clearance as well. And of course, you know, it references things like contingency plans and the relation to what happens if a system goes down or the system becomes unavailable or in maintenance periods. I was in a Zoom meeting not too long ago where it unfortunately only lasted about 20 minutes because all of a sudden there was multiple YouTube clips playing and nobody could talk, and we didn't have a contingency plan for that meeting. So that's why that's always important. Recommendations on the presentation of the original certificate, so how it gets there, how it is displayed, what you can do, replacements around that. We know that sometimes certificates need to be replaced, and this is where paperless in itself becomes a really key element for agricultural trade, because those problem resolutions are much faster, especially for a country like Australia that's so heavily focused on exports. If we're sending something to the Netherlands or to the United Arab Emirates and we have to wait for the replacement paper to arrive, that could be 48-hour, 72-hour delay that possibly perishable goods are waiting. The replacements through a paperless aspect really do allow for the facilitation of goods to get out on the shelves a lot faster, which is critical in today's day and age. And of course, the revocation when the certificate's no longer valid, there's elements in the guidance document about that as well. Annex 1 and 2, that they're absolutely so vital, and the reference data model, which I mentioned before, gives the details of the generic model certificate in that XML form. So it takes the generic model certificate that's in Codex and shows you how it relates to the eCert standard, particularly the UNC FAC standard there. This is a really valuable tool that can not just be used by business, but also technology developers as well. And I mentioned at the top of my talk that this is something I wish I had 10 years ago, and I really do mean that. This is something that is absolutely invaluable to show the pathways and the linkages that everything that you're after in a paper certificate can be there in a paperless world, and provides a really strong example of how you can harmonize things to the best of our ability. And that reference data model is unique. I don't think there's been something like this included in Codex documentation before, but it certainly provides really great insight into the linkages and the flow of how XML is linked for paperless certification, as well as I said before, the detailed mapping of the individual elements. Where does an exporter live? Where does a consignee live? Where does my product information go? That stuff is absolutely vital and really, really key. There's other elements in the annexes around laws and regulation changes. Now, these are really critical things to consider, because you might have the greatest intentions in the world to progress to paperless certification and really move in that direction, but are there any laws or regulations within your country that prevent you from doing that? And we've had that experience here in Australia where we spent probably 18 months working with a trading partner, and we all agreed to remove paper, and we selected a particular date. And then about 3-4 weeks out from that date, excuse me, we received notification that they couldn't remove the paper because they had to go through their parliament to change the legislation, because within their legislation was a specific clause that says a paper certificate in its original form must be provided. So they need to go back and change their legislation. So it's really key that everybody looks at any laws or regulations that might have an impact on when and how you remove the paper certification. And as you do that, it's really important, as I mentioned before, the business processes and the flows. Who else may or may not need access to that data? Do your customs authority do that? Maybe you're part of your customs authority. Australia isn't in that fortunate position, unfortunately, but does it impact your Ministry of Finance? Does it connect to your Ministry of Trade? What's the flow within your own circle to ensure that all those people who may, for regulatory reasons, need to have access to that. And that's the key, that is the competent authority who is receiving that, who else may that occur with and be provided to. The transition to paperless, this is a really excellent part of the document, along with the data model, that really caters for the different stages. You know, I'm just starting out on my paperless journey. What do I need to do? And the information there on transitioning to paperless gives you a really good step-by-step pathway on how you can get there, including interim points, like if you needed sending signed PDFs, and how you would then transition from there into the removal of the paper into the XML exchange fully, so that you can have your paperless agricultural trade. And that's where it's really key that it actually caters for all those different stages through there. And for those people who are entirely paperless and maybe didn't have to go through some of those steps, it gives you an idea of some of the hurdles that other countries may be facing in their own journey, that you might be able to help assist and provide guidance to. That transitioning to paperless is a really impressive piece of work in there. And it's got information on the current transmission mechanisms. So we regularly talk about single access object protocol, you know, the SMTP, the push-pull method, things like non-repudiation as well. There's references in there to national single windows, because we know that they're being developed regularly around the world and becoming more and more the norm in some places. And that sort of captures the current state of play. What it doesn't do is head you in a path in terms of things like blockchain or quantum computing and things like that, because that's futuristic stuff. And the blockchain technology is probably a broader conversation to have within your own national environments as well. So it gives you an idea, or it gives you a clear information on where the or how the information can be exchanged. But it also says that, you know, this doesn't say that you can't do it another way. If you've got a better way to do it, we're all looking for better ways to do things, and we would absolutely welcome and encourage them. The guidance, it's there to help and to create a clear path. I really like this picture because it probably shows the two sides of my eCert or paperless life. And on the left there, you can see all the wires a little bit tangled and wound together, and that was probably me as I started off. Well, not probably, definitely was me as I started off on my paperless journey, trying to pull it all apart to understand it. And then you see on the right, you know, the colored wires bound up in their groups as it clearly makes sense. And that's what this guidance document is there to do, to provide advice and clear direction as to how you can do it, and how it can be achieved. And it's really important to note that nothing in there is mandatory. We're not saying you have to do everything in there, but what it does is provide enough flexibility for people to find their paperless model in there. So if they need things like non-repudiation, electronic digital signatures, there's information in there on how that would work. If you don't need that, there's information on how that would work. If you're only getting to the point where you're doing secure PDFs, fantastic, that's great, there's information there. If you're paperless, there's information there. And the key elements around competent authorities or third parties who may be performing tasks for those competent authorities. There's been a great amount of detail going to this, and some really fantastic conversation with our colleagues in the codex space as to what we can do and how we can do it, and making sure that we cater for all these different elements. And I think it is really something that will provide a path forward for paperless. It will accelerate us to that paperless place, and will help with the uptake through that. And with that in mind, that means that there'll be people in different stages in different journeys, but there's always somebody to come along on that paperless ride with you. And the COVID-19 pandemic has been a real accelerator for this, which is probably why the guidance document that has thankfully been adopted at CAC just a couple of weeks ago is such an exciting piece of material that can really start to help link agricultural trade in a new way, a modern way, and a really exciting way to go forward. And I really believe that this will help us all take that paperless journey together, and we'll have a clear path on how we get there, and what the end goal is. And I think it's really fantastic that the CAC have approved that, and I really thank you all for the opportunity to share and discuss this with you today. And I certainly hope to be using this documentation with so many of you out there to help create that paperless trade, not just between Australia and your individual countries, but for you to utilize that with all your major trading partners and minor trading partners across the world. I think it's a fantastic thing that's only going to benefit us going forward. So with that, I thank you very much for your time.